So, navigating payroll in 2024, challenges, service offerings, and provider selection. So, I have a couple of fabulous panelists with me today that I will let introduce themselves shortly. But before we dive into that, I just want to set the scene a little bit. So, Employment Hero, who we have with us today, did a state of outsourced payroll report here in the UK. And actually, the perceptions of offering outsourced payroll services were quite negative. Actually, just 12% of the firms that answered in that survey saw it as a profit driver. 11% saw it as a necessary evil. And whilst 35% thought of it as a way to attract and retain clients, they didn't see it as a way to drive revenue itself. So, in other words, while lots of firms are offering outsourced payroll services, they seem to be doing so quite begrudgingly. And there's no doubt that there are definitely some real challenges around payroll in the UK. But actually, the findings in that report show that the existing negative perceptions are potentially misguided because actually the firms that are offering outsourced payroll are making 17% more than those who don't. So there is a real opportunity there. But we want to be realistic as well. So today the plan is to talk through the challenges surrounding payroll, but also the opportunities, how we can wrap that up in a really nice service for clients, and then how we evaluate those service providers to make it as easy and as simple as possible. Any questions welcome, please do pop them in the Q&A section, pop them in the comments, and we will absolutely have time to chat through them as we go. But in the meantime, I will hand over to my wonderful panelists to introduce themselves, starting with you, Sam, if that's okay.
Yeah, Kaylee, thank you so much for having me. So my name's Sam. I'm currently a partnerships account executive, excuse me, at Employment Hero. Really, my role for the last year and a half has been working alongside payroll professionals and supporting them in integrating new software into their practices. So was really keen to come on this call and kind of give that side of what we've been hearing over the past year of, really what those challenges look like from that payroll provider perspective.
Amazing, thank you. And over to you, please, Ben.
So I'm Ben. I'm the MD of Street Steel. We're a practice. I run the Bristol office, but we're a top 40 firm across the UK. So we have about 28 offices. And we are what I guess some would call a general practice in that we cover most services, payroll being one of them. Yeah.
Amazing, thank you very, very much. So let's dive straight into this. Sam, I know that you are often out and about meeting lots of wonderful people. And as a provider of those payroll services, what do you see and kind of hear from people as the key challenges facing providers at the moment?
Yeah, really good question. Thanks, Kaylee. And I think really what we hear a lot of on the ground, especially, is they really want more customer facing time more than anything. But I think ultimately where that gets bogged down in is those admin tasks, think about scaling, ensuring compliancy alongside all of that. And I think probably the to summarize that in maybe three of those points would be, those legislative and regulatory changes they're having to keep on top of. We've heard recently about the NI contribution change again. Alongside that, almost talent acquisition, skill shortages currently within the sector. But then also, last but not least with that, and probably what we see a lot of, is that technology and automation piece, where a lot of practices are still relying on manual, outdated payroll systems, but also the idea that of implementing a new payroll system or software can require that investment of time, training, change management. So quite a few things, but I think really with that, it's the balance of those tasks with wanting to spend more time facing their customers.
Oh, yes, the thing we're all facing, right? Ben, does that line up with kind of your experience day to day?
Yeah, there's a few points that are similar to what I was thinking then. So we've sort of categorized here three main issues that we find across the board. So number one is talent. So I think the industry as a whole, regardless of what area within accountancy they work, but payroll we have found specifically difficult to recruit for. Last year we were trying to recruit for probably 14 months for a decent payroll manager to cover maternity leave, and we gave up in the end, and we just sort of brought all of the team together and asked everybody to chip in because it was just impossible to find somebody of good quality with experience who who were sort of willing to walk in and handle such a big workload, because that's what essentially payroll is. It is a big workload, and it's a never-ending workload. So it can be quite a daunting area. So recruitment and talent is a big one. As you say, automation and software is a big area. So what you find is lots of softwares now seem to be in the habit of ridiculously constant price increases. And what that then making people do is evaluate, do we switch payroll, which becomes a big change management situation, as you said, Sam? Do we stick to our guns? How do we price that? And then I think at that point, a lot of people are just thinking, let's just outsource and not do it ourselves. And the third area, I think, is that we're finding becoming an increasing issue is a lot of bookkeeping software, Xero, QuickBooks, etc., have their inbuilt payroll software. And so like bookkeeping and VAT over the years, payroll's become an area that clients are wanting to try themselves, because it's just a few buttons to click. And so, again, that's becoming an increasing problem, is to explain how majorly wrong payroll can go by letting clients loose on it themselves.
Precisely. On the talent piece, what do you think it is that's stopping people wanting to do that? Because I think from my perspective, one of the things that's coming up is when we talk about like accounting and accounting services, there is obviously still lots of chatter around advisory and some of the sexier stuff that people want to be doing. Do you think that that's inhibiting some of the more like junior members coming into the industry of wanting to get into payroll?
I think so. That the one thing we've seen across the board in accounts, bookkeeping, tax, and including payroll is that less and less people want to do what we call the donkey work. People just don't want to actually put the work in anymore. They want to be in a position, even if they don't have the qualifications or experience, where they don't believe they have to do that type of work. And they think because of software and changes and whatever else is happening in the industry and in the UK, there's less and less people wanting to actually do the day-to-day work that we all did, throughout our career and training, and they actually believe they should be stepping into a position where it's ready for them to just finalize, face the clients, work from home, go out to meetings, and actually that still leaves nobody doing the work. And yes, we have automation, but there's still got to be a level of work before that, but people don't seem to want that part of the job anymore for some reason.
It makes sense. I guess just on that a little bit further, how do you keep your team engaged and doing that work?
I think the trick, which I guess is one of the big points of today, is to automate as much as you can. So there are a lot of boring, slow, mundane tasks that can be automated. But I guess it's just making the team realistic, sort of understand from a realistic point of view that there will still be work to do. That's why we're all here. But we will try our best constantly to try to automate as much as we can.
Absolutely. And I guess from your side, Sam, you mentioned in particular like regulation and the automation piece. What are you guys doing to support firms on, I guess, getting the team still engaged and doing as much automation as possible, but still engaged to do the work?
Yeah, I think that automation piece is so important, and I think not only the automation side, but I think also integration comes into that as well. So of course, automating what you can, but also if you've then got those integrations into other softwares that are going to enable you to do work more quickly, more effectively. I think what we're really trying to do is, we've always had that open API employment here, and just encouraging partnerships where we can, to really drive that forward. Realistically, it's for the good of the partner, but also for the good of the client as well.
We're a big fan of the Employment Hero API. But no, exactly that. I think you're both spot on. I think the talent piece is super, super interesting, particularly coupled with the automation. I still think there's probably more we can do in that space, right, to tie the two together and get people that are coming in excited about things like payroll and the automations available, and make it something that is interesting that people still want to do, without kind of, as you say, Ben, pushing it to the side and kind of going, actually, I don't want to do that work. I want to do the sexy stuff with clients. Because ultimately people need to get paid, and none of that fun stuff happens if that doesn't happen. But not all doom and gloom, that's for sure. With all of those challenges comes some wonderful opportunity. And I guess, Ben, I'm really keen to hear from your side, because payroll is something that you guys are actively doing. It's something that you are continuing to develop your service line in, how have you managed to use payroll as an opportunity for the firm?
Well, one of the things we've discovered over the years is that payroll is probably the best opportunity for touch points with clients. The most times we hear from clients, 90% of the time, it is payroll related. And so it gives you that opportunity for much more regular contact. Now, for a firm like us who are really big on client communication, contact, regular check-ins and conversations, and actually just knowing what's happening on the ground day to day with clients, we found payroll the best opportunity for that. You know, you've got sometimes weekly, at a minimum monthly contact with that client. Most clients, no matter how small or how big, it's usually the owner who still likes to control payroll. And so you have that direct contact on a regular basis with the owner. And so we've seen it as a way to maintain that really close relationship with clients. And it's the biggest, I guess, risk area we find with clients is no matter how well you do their accounts and tax and bookkeeping, if payroll goes wrong or if they're not happy about payroll, it's usually the biggest reason a client will move accountants. And so again, it gives us that control of making sure, you know, we give a good service, we give the service level that they would expect across the board. And yeah, it means we can sort of keep in contact a lot more.
And on that, I guess two things. I'm going to chuck in the buzz term of scope creep with clients calling up for those kind of things. How do you manage that? How do you make sure that people aren't just spending ages on the phone talking about things where you guys potentially aren't making any more money from that?
So I think there's two solutions to that, and they're both needed. Number one is having the right systems in place to have that awareness. So if you don't have systems that will give you that information at the touch of a button, then that's point number one that you need to tackle. You need to be able to run a report which gives you a list of employee numbers for every client, and be able to have that readily available. And the second side is awareness. So again, it's not something that the owner of a firm can do by themselves. We all like to hold on to tasks. We're all quite protective of our tasks, and billing and fees is usually a big one that practice owners like to keep control of. But actually, I've found that it's more empowering and more effective to actually give the entire team, and in this instance, the payroll team, awareness of scope creep and fees, and make them aware that actually the client is paying per employee, and therefore we need to keep track of that. And so what I give the team is a buffer to work on. And if it's within a buffer, I don't need to know. And if it goes outside of that buffer, they're aware, and then they make me aware. And we review that quarterly across the board. So every quarter we do a full analysis of how many employees are clients paying for and how many they're actually processing. And that's sort of how we tend to keep on top.
Amazing. I think it's really important because I think that's part of it where people talk about it as being like a loss leader and being quite a negative task. I think a lot of it is that there is a lot of risk associated with it. Business owners are still quite protective of it, and you guys have to be able to offer the support. But with that, I think what often happens is exactly what you've described. People are having all of these great conversations, sometimes not so great conversations, but either way, you can accumulate quite a lot of time spent there. And I think as we start talking about really offering it as a service line, I think that's where the pricing piece also becomes really important, right? And making sure that actually you guys are getting the most out of it and extracting those opportunities. But also some people do see it as a loss leader. It doesn't have to be, and actually it can be really, really value add. Sam, switching over to you, from a tech perspective, what are you seeing in terms of trends and opportunity for firms in payroll at the moment?
Yeah, again, a good question. I think really from that tech perspective, really, I think I think we've brought it up already, but it's really thinking about how we can automate as much of those tasks as possible, but then leaning into then how we can enhance that client experience alongside that. I think the first point to that is, I think cloud-based solutions now really kind of taking over the space, enabling, not only that, kind of internet connection from anywhere, remote work, but also then that collaboration with clients, real-time access to that payroll information, which is just so important, again, just in terms of making sure that efficiency is there within that payroll setup. We've already really touched on the automation of those routine tasks. I think Ben's touched on that really nicely. But what you're then being able to do is there's things now such as, your employee self-service portals when it comes to the payroll. So they can access their pay slips, update their personal information. They can take some ownership of it on their end rather than that payroll professional having to constantly chase or update what that looks like, even down to timesheets now. And what we're ultimately trying to do with that from an employment hero perspective, I think, is really then look at that value added service that they can then offer to their clients. So, more efficient payroll processes supported by technology. We can then look at, so what we're trying to do is the HR side, especially, is, how can we then layer that on top and pull that HR within the payroll process and make it more of an offering for accountants and payroll professionals moving forward.
And I think we're all in agreement, right? There's a huge opportunity there. One of the questions that's come through that I think ties nicely into this is someone that said, actually, I really like doing all the boring, mundane tasks, and I'm a little bit concerned about automation in payroll. And I imagine, Sam, that is one of the lovely things that you guys come up against when you're out talking about Employment Hero. How do you talk about or demonstrate the opportunity there for those that potentially are a little bit more wary about automating some of these tasks and handing some of that responsibility over?
Yeah, and look, automation is clearly a key piece. It's kind of a buzzword at the moment, but also I think a lot of that comes down to the relinquishment of control that people have over these tasks. Look, we're never going to say, you have to automate every single piece. People are still going to be able to control what they do and the tasks that they do. But I think if you're on a call like this looking to be more efficient and to, really drive your practice forward and ultimately make it a profit maker, a revenue stream more through that payroll side, I think there are limited ways now to do that away from technology and embracing of it. But at the same time, if that's how people feel and they want to continue in that vein, all power to them.
Absolutely. Makes complete sense. I think I want to dive into how we offer this as a service line, because there's lots of questions I've written down. We've been touching on bits that I think will feed into this as a whole. So I think one of the things I really want to touch on, and Ben, you talked about this, is it's kind of twofold. One, you've mentioned that actually payroll is still a risk area, right? It's an area where things can go wrong and people can get very upset and it can all go a little bit wrong quite quickly. Coupled with the fact that some of the tech providers are now having built-in payroll into them that's kind of going, hey, business owner, you can do this on your own. How are you having those conversations with clients to really highlight the value of actually outsourcing that to people like yourselves?
I think it becomes a conversation similar to what you would have with the client as to why they shouldn't do their own tax return, why they shouldn't be doing their own VAT returns. It's the exact same conversation. It's about risk management, and it's about how much level of risk the client is willing to take. We've all, anybody doing this job a while has all seen cases with HMRC where PAYE goes wrong. Anybody else who's involved with payroll knows certainly in the last 6 to 8 months, HMRC have been a nightmare of getting things wrong on their system, and then dealing with it becomes even worse. So it's just making the clients aware of the risk, what can happen, and the fact that it's a lot more technical than just pressing a button. But we've all had those conversations with clients about VAT, about tax returns. So it's the same thing. It's just about managing risk, explaining to them the consequences, and explaining to them that actually there's a lot more to it. And clients are not stupid. You will always have two types of clients. You will always have those who, no matter what you say, will always want to give it a go, and you can't talk them out of it. And then you'll have clients who actually understand once you've explained maybe the risk is too high to give it a go myself. And they're the ones that you want to go for. If you're talking to a client who, no matter what, wants to do it themselves, you're never going to change their mind. And then your decision is whether you sit back and pick up the pieces when it does go wrong, or whether you sort of explain to that client that maybe you're not the best client for us to look after, and they might have to go. And that's the way we've done it, because it sounds extreme, but we do now say to clients who want to do these things themselves, we don't actually look after them anymore at all. The reason being, it's the fallout that is the biggest headache. It's the biggest area we find fees can be lost is when you do allow clients to try things themselves and then allow them to sort of pass on the fallout to you to sort out. And to avoid that completely from the beginning is probably the best option we find.
I agree. I think that probably feeds into the firms and the people out there that are thinking of payroll as like this necessary evil and this loss leader. I think I've had lots of conversations where people are wanting to avoid that element of risk of clients doing it themselves. And so what they're doing is just charging ridiculously small amounts to do payroll for them in the hopes of combating that challenge, but actually just creating a load of work for themselves that is then not profitable. I think that in itself is a real challenge. And I think the stance that you guys have taken of actually, no, if you want to do it yourself, you're probably not the people that we should be working with. But if we are going to work with you, we're going to charge you accordingly for that work. And I think a lot of firms get themselves into a little bit of a downward spiral with payroll, where it then gets to a point where it's like, we hate offering this, but we have to, which is a real shame. On that, I guess it leads nicely into charging and pricing. What would be your words of wisdom, Ben, for those thinking that they probably need to reprice or wanting to start offering this as a service where they've avoided it before?
Yeah, I think one thing, and you sort of touched on it there, is people are scared to price properly. People are scared to lose clients by pricing what they should be. And so they're happy to, maybe happy is the wrong word, but they're consciously taking a hit because they're too scared to charge what they should be. I think step one, lessons I've learned over the years is actually clients are less negatively responsive to price increases than you think. So last year, for example, we did a price increase across every client. And we sent the messages, we sent the letters, the emails, the offers of phone calls, and then we sat there and I wanted to get under my desk waiting for the fallout of that. And across hundreds of clients, we didn't have a single client leave. And it really shocked me. I've always been one of those that is afraid to do price increases, always have been. Luckily, my business partner is the opposite. So we're quite a good pairing. But I've always been afraid. And genuinely, it's made me realize that actually the key is to provide a good service. And as long as you are providing a good service, they will pay for it. You will have moaners. There's always going to be moaners. What am I getting for this extra fee, etc.? Just explain it. Just talk to them. Just have a conversation with them. I'll be surprised if they leave. And if they do, the reality, some people might not want to hear this, it's probably because of the service that they're getting and not necessarily the fee that you're charging. So just get the right fee per head, have a sliding scale so you can accommodate for larger payrolls and smaller. Make sure you are charging for the extras. So again, that's where sometimes losses can occur. So don't forget, you're usually taking care of things like auto enrollment. So you need to make sure you are including that in the fee. If you provide, it was touched on earlier, client portal for employees to be able to get pay slips, you're probably paying for that. So make sure you're charging that on. And then obviously, which we'll come to, I'm sure, paying employees after payroll's been finalized and filed. Again, that's a service and that is time that you're taking and a risk. So again, making sure you charge for that. We have 3 sections on our payroll fees. So we have the payroll, which is charged per employee and whether it's variable or fixed, and also whether it's weekly or monthly. We then have the auto enrollment part of the fee, and then we have whether we're making wages and PAYE payments. And we have like 3 sections to ours. So it's not, across the board, you used to see historically there was just one line for payroll. We actually now break that down into a lot more detail. And that's when the client understands because they can see what it is they're paying for.
Yeah, 100%. I think that in itself is invaluable, right? I think we are definitely moving away from fees that are just wrapped up as one badged thing and clients querying and questioning them because they don't know where those fees have come from or what they're made up of, right? And I think that transparency is really, really key because a client may not like what the fee says, but if they can understand where it's come from, they are much more inclined to go, yeah, that makes sense, than seeing this big old figure for payroll and going, I'm not paying someone that much to do that, I'll do it myself, right? So I think that's really, really important. Sam, I'm going to come to you in a minute, but Ben, I just want to touch on a touchy topic for most, which is software costs that go alongside this, right? And Sam and I will have our own views on this coming from the software side, but you mentioned it briefly there. When it comes to payroll and payroll software, are you building that cost on into what you're charging, or are you guys absorbing that as we need this software, we're taking the hit on that?
Yeah, most software we charge for. So payroll, basic payroll software, so we use BrightPay, that's built into the cost of us doing payroll. It's not really a charged sort of add-on. It's just part of our parcel. We call that an internal software. So we mostly swallow that cost. But for then extras like the employee portal that we pay extra for above and beyond the software, we charge that on. Because it's not a necessity. So you can have the portal for employees, but you don't need it. And that way, if you offer it as a choice, they're making the decision to pay extra for that, and it's an easier conversation. Same with making payments. If you want to use our payment service, here is the extra fee, and obviously the cost of us providing that payment service is built into that. And again, because you're offering those as additional extras and not necessities, clients are more likely to be happy to pay for something that they are choosing to pay for and not being forced to pay for. So we do have a bit of a mixture. The sort of basic payroll software is what it is. We sort of cover that. But the extras and add-ons, which is where the efficiencies start to come in, and the profitability from providing a payroll service, those you can easily just price off to clients.
100%. I think that's really interesting. I think it used to be on average just as software costs across firms as a whole. If we go back for like the last 5 to 10 years, software costs as a whole within firms were sitting at about 77% of turnover for most firms. And I think there's some new data coming out that suggests that that's gone up to about 10%. The challenge I think firms are having is that the revenue isn't growing at that same rate as the software cost. And I think that's where the pricing and the charging bit becomes so important, because it's all well and good bringing the software in, automating, doing all of these things. But if you're not charging for it, that's where we start to get into this loss leader position where it's not working out. Sam, how are you finding conversations with firms around adopting new software, around automating some of this? Is cost coming up as a blocker at the moment?
Yeah, I think cost always comes up, and I think I try and move away from the word of cost and speak about value more than anything. I'm a firm believer that if somebody joins you on price, they'll leave you on price. And I think probably from a software perspective and from a payroll client perspective rings true for both. And I think ultimately what you have to look at is, so often we'll hear it, oh, well, this is cheaper, or okay, well, that's more expensive. And it's like, well, actually, is that software going to benefit you not only in terms of where you can pass on those costs, but also the cost saving day to day of what the tasks are that your staff would normally be doing? Is that going to give you space to open up more client facing time? Is that going to mean that they can do other roles within that role rather than just doing these tasks monotonously? And I think really what that comes down to is kind of resetting of mindset and attitude kind of towards the day to day. But also then really when it comes down to it's also the resetting of client expectations with that as well, isn't it, really? And I think Ben's covered that really nicely in terms of where he places value, where they feel that they can charge. But again, ultimately, it's going to come down to the service that you offer. And I think really the final point on that is, yeah, okay, well, what is the charge of the software, versus what are we then charging for that? But where does that value piece really come into it if we are going to invest our time and energy into changing this over?
100%, couldn't agree more. And I think on the value piece, it wouldn't be a Teleroo webinar if I didn't mention us. But I think that feeds really nicely into that as to how do we add value to this process, right? And that's where we obviously want to engage with the likes of Employment Hero and make it possible to do those payments. Ben, we've obviously had many conversations about how you're able to add payments into that process and what that looks like. From your perspective, Ben, have clients received that well in terms of actually we can extend this service and take this bit as well?
Yeah, and what's interesting actually is go back 5 to 10 years, and making payments for clients was quite rare, especially wages payments. It was just not a thing that many practices did, and it wasn't really a thing that a lot of clients wanted or asked for either. I think now that they are aware that it is a service out there and that it can be done, and that business owners seem to be tackling a lot more fires lately of just trying to stay afloat, things like spending 1 to 2 hours paying payroll payments is time that they don't have. And now that they know they can pass that off, we're getting asked way more now to offer that as a service. Some clients, brand new inquiries coming to us are just saying, oh, and I presume you do this. And luckily we are able to say, yes, of course we do. And we can say it confidently, and we know that we're going to be able to make a profit on that service as well. But 5 years ago, it was rarely asked and it was rarely done, and it was sort of few and far between. And now I would say at least half of our payroll clients are having a payment service as well. It's just part of the package. But again, the key is to create an efficient system to do that. Going back a few years ago when we did have just a handful and we were just having logins for clients' bank accounts, and somebody had to sit there for like 2 hours inputting everybody's wage and checking it 2, 3, 4 times over to really make sure they're paying the right amount to the right person. And then when it goes wrong and you accidentally manually put the wrong person's wage into a different employee, it was an absolute nightmare and headache. And I'm not surprised that, a few years ago when that was the situation, people were put off providing payments as a service. The risk was way too high and it was way too much of a manual service to provide. And it was taking up a lot of hours of people's time. So the key, as we've said, is to have that efficient process, but also a process that will minimize risk. And that's a big area for payment processing with payroll, suppliers as well. But payroll, it's more difficult to correct if it goes wrong. So that's the key there.
100%. I mean, not to derail from payroll too much, but I think that's exactly what we're hearing right on the Teleroo side is we've got firms that either have got incredibly manual processes where they've got people looking over people's shoulders, double checking numbers to get payments out of bank accounts, or they're having difficult conversations with indemnity insurance providers around what premiums look like if they have access to clients' bank accounts, or for some of the smaller people that are wanting to do this, getting set up as a BACS bureau can be quite an expensive process for them, etc. So actually, I think, like you say, Ben, I think clients are looking for that support, and accountants and payroll providers are now having to look at ways that they can deliver that service in an efficient way, as well. There's people in the Q&A agreeing with you there, Ben, as well. But conscious of time, evaluating payroll service providers, I guess, Sam, keen to hear from your side what you think are the key things people should be thinking about and looking at when considering new providers, obviously unbiased.
I'll try to be as unbiased as possible. I think, in all honesty, the first step to it is looking inwards before looking outwards. What are you trying to achieve by changing software or changing a certain part of your tech stack? Every provider will have a vision, they'll have a roadmap of what's coming up. I think it's really getting to grips with those and actually working out, does that align with your own plans? And, can you see this software being able to scale with you, in 5 years' time, and making sure that it's an investment that's worth having. I think the second part to that is also bringing it back to that value for money piece, looking at the overall cost. So, of course, within that, you're going to have subscription fees. You might have implementation costs within there. There might be additional charges for extra features or support in there, or hidden costs. And I think it's about looking at that as a full picture and saying, well, what are we actually going to be investing in this? Where can we make sure that cost is either passed on or that we can then absorb to make sure that we can then have this as a profitable, scalable entity of our business? But I think first and foremost, it's about, I think we get a lot of potential partners come to us and it tends to be a reactive decision rather than a proactive decision. Well, this has happened with here, so we're looking to move, or this is something they've done, so we're looking to move. Whereas actually we very rarely hear we're looking to change this or move this. So we are taking it within our grip to change and move. And I think it'd be so much more lovely to hear that on a day-to-day basis of people taking control and saying, this is where we want to go, this is the direction we're going in, and this is why we're making this decision.
Absolutely. Completely agree. Ben, anything you would add to that? Anything you guys are considering over and above when looking at new providers, I guess for payroll, but also just across app stacks in general?
Yeah, I think one of the key things to do is to map it out, as Sam said, map out the total situation of what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to solve. And it's about choosing softwares that will streamline and make the whole service efficient. I wouldn't go into any situation and look at a standalone payroll, a standalone software by itself. You have to look at it across the board, because it's all good and well finding a fantastic payroll software, but if it then doesn't connect onto the other things you need to do from that, then actually you're just creating a bottleneck and a situation there. So look at it as a whole, plan out the points that you need to provide, then look at the software options for each, and then see how they connect up, or if they connect up, and look at it as a whole. So as I said, don't go and choose a payroll software that doesn't connect to somebody like Teleroo, because then you can't offer that service. So it's about looking at it start to finish, as opposed to just as a standalone piece of software.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think one of the things I always find fascinating is I still have calls with firms now where they'll come on and you kind of ask the question, what is it that you're looking to achieve with this? And they're like, well, we just want a payment software. And I'm like, and what's important to you that it can do? And it's like, well, make payments. And you're like, okay, let's go back to the start here around actually what are the 10 pieces of functionality that it needs to have? And then let's rank those in terms of importance. And then let's go through and work out what it can do. And what always is shocking to me is when they come onto a call with Teleroo and they've already had 2 or 3 other software demos and haven't had that conversation yet. Because I'm like, in terms of evaluating, you're going on gut feel. And whilst that's great sometimes, I think sometimes having those more quantitative metrics to be able to go, we need it to integrate with this, this, and this, and we need it to do X, Y, and Z, I think can be really, really important, particularly now the software market is so vast and there are so many providers at all of the shows, in all of your inboxes constantly. I think being able to really sit back and evaluate that is really, really helpful. Going to move into Q&A. We'll give everyone a moment to pop any additional questions in. But before we do that, I'm conscious you always get people drop off during Q&A. So to make sure they get the most value out of Sam and Ben today, I am going to ask you to both give your one piece of advice or top tip that you want people to walk away from today with, if nothing else. We will go to Ben first, if that's okay.
I think the top tip for anybody who's already providing payroll, but they do feel like it's a bit of a loss maker and they're not sure whether to continue. I think those people need to maybe just plot out what their current service looks like and then investigate, okay, well, actually, can we automate or make any of this quicker and more efficient? Is there anything in our current service offering with payroll that actually is a lot more manual than it needs to be? And therefore, can we actually reduce, the trick with automating with software, with payroll, is to reduce the time of your payroll staff so you can take on more payroll. That's when the service becomes profitable. You're able to take on more payrolls without having to recruit more people. That's the aim here. So it's looking at your system that you currently provide. Can any of that be automated? Yes, great. Then that frees up an extra couple of hours a week to take on more payrolls. And look, suddenly we are making a profit on this service. So I would plot out your existing service and see where the gaps are and where you can automate more and start from there.
Amazing. Sam, over to you. Your one piece for people to take away.
Yeah, again, try to be as unbiased as possible. But I think, look, I think from what we've spoken about today, I think while tech and software provides that opportunity to enhance that client experience, save those repetitive tasks and add to those value added, I think what we've spoken about a lot today is a lot of that success hinging on the attitude and the value placed on those payroll services and ensuring things like scalability and ultimately that cost and value proposition of different providers. So I would hope what people take away from today is, yes, of course, go and look at the tech stacks available to you, but really look more inwards and think, well, what are we doing at the moment and how can we make an impact first before then taking that next step to look at things that can support us.
Amazing. Thank you. Just a couple of questions and then I will let you lovely gents go. The first one, Ben, is for you, which is, why did you choose a solution like Teleroo over becoming a BACS bureau?
For us, it fitted the model as a whole. So we provide lots of other services with clients which involve or used to involve having bank access, but certainly involves us needing to make payments. So not just for payroll, but for suppliers and all sorts. And so it was just a solution that actually fitted our model across the board in all of our service offerings. And again, it's about reducing the number of software you're using. That's again key here. So try not to have too big of an app stack or a tech stack. Choose the ones that will cover as many areas as you can in one sweep. And Teleroo did that. So it covered lots of our problems that we had to do with payment systems in one go.
Amazing. Sam, one for you. Do you think the tech and software will at some point remove all need for human intervention in payroll?
Oh God, what a question. I was actually on a panel at Fab last week on AI versus human touch and a debate on there. And I think what we really came up with is, as much as that automation is going to hopefully replace a lot of those tasks, there's still that human touch that is going to be absolutely vital in the day-to-day. And again, that customer facing part of that is still going to be so key. What I hope, in all honesty, in the future is that automation can replace a lot of those day-to-day tasks where people can have more customer facing time. But I think ultimately that is going to come down to people's willingness to embrace that. And you're always going to have some people battling against the tide. And it's going to be interesting to see, if we're sat here in 5 years' time, what that looks like. So I know from 5 years ago, it now looks completely different to where we were then.
Definitely. Sam, people have asked how they can get in touch with you. Can I leave you to pop your email address in the chat box for anyone that wants to reach out? But other than that, thank you all very much. I think the key takeaway from me here is that there is a huge opportunity here. It doesn't have to be doom and gloom. It doesn't have to be a loss leader. It doesn't have to be something your team dread doing. There are ways of making this a profitable service. There are ways of making this an enjoyable service. And that actually, if we are adopting the right tech, we're being firm on our processes, we're being clear with clients around the communication, around the pricing, and ultimately the value. There is huge amounts that we can still do in the payroll space. A huge thank you, Sam and Ben, for your time today, and for everyone for joining us. Take care. Any questions, the recording will come out. My email address is on there. Feel free to reach out, and I can always put you in touch with anyone that you need to speak to. Thank you very much.